Look, sometimes the most difficult thing to do is to understand the times which you're actually living through. It's always easier for historians because they have the benefit of hindsight. But we are living through a sea change in world politics. And if you look just at the events spanning the last few days, then you can understand why Julian Assange is locked up in Belmarsh facing extradition to the United States. Not the self-serving lies of the Trump administration or the May government or the fake news spread by the British and American media, the real reason. Now, last weekend the Israeli government was raining down bombs on Gaza and carrying out targeted assassinations. 16 Palestinians were killed, including a pregnant mother and a 14-month-old baby. On Sunday evening, US National Security Advisor John Bolton announced that the aircraft carrier US Abraham Lincoln and nuclear-capable B-52 bombers were being deployed to threaten Iran. He warned that any attack on United States interests or those of our allies will be met with unrelenting force. That same evening, President Trump retweeted a post by the evangelist Jerry Falwell Jr. calling for him to extend his term from 4 years to 6, a de facto threat to cancel the 2020 presidential elections. Now, throughout the rest of the week, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was lashing out in every direction, threatening enemies and allies alike. He said, "We will hold the Iranians accountable for attacks on American interests." He was speaking on Monday at a conference of countries that have territories in the Arctic Circle. Now, while there, Pompeo also denounced China for pursuing, quote, national security aims, Russia for a pattern of aggressive behaviour, and declared Canada's claim on the Northwest Passage to be illegitimate. He then pointedly cancelled a meeting with German Chancellor Angela Merkel and flew instead to Iraq to underscore the US threat to plunge the Middle East into war. Now, the full gravity of these events was highlighted by Saturday's announcement that the US was also sending a Patriot missile defence system to the Middle East. The threat of war has never been more real and has never been more imminent. I ask you all here, how similar does this sound to the run-up to the Iraq War in 2003, with its talk of weapons of mass destruction, of an unspecified threat to US forces? Now, the US is the real aggressor in the Middle East. Even ABC News was obliged to note that the US Navy's 5th Fleet is based in Bahrain, that Saudi Arabia is home to over 7,000 American troops, Qatar 10,000, Kuwait 13,000, and the United Arab Emirates 5,000. Dubai, moreover, is also the largest port of call for the US Navy outside of America. And the war danger is not confined to the Middle East. A May 15 foreign policy article I read this week is entitled "How to Win America's Next War." It cites a statement by the then Defence Secretary James Mattis, which he made in 2018, that great power competition and not terrorism is now the Pentagon's priority, and then he called for this strategy to be fleshed out. Russia, and especially China, it said, are the primary targets for military aggression. But the article then spoke of the US having, quote, an enduring interest in open access to the world's key regions, primarily Asia and Europe, to ensure their latent power is not turned against it. The article then continues. For a generation, the Pentagon operated on what might be called the Desert Storm model, under which the United States exploited the enormous technical advantage it had developed, starting in the 1970s, to build a military capable of dominating any opponent in the 1990s and 2000s, a time when it lacked a peer competitor. The problem today, however, is the approach that works so well against these so-called rogue state adversaries will fail against China or Russia. To make this strategy work will require a force posture that is much more lethal, agile, and ready. Now, this new and more aggressive turn to war is why the US wants Julian Assange in its clutches. Now, while in the United Kingdom, Pompeo warned the May government to back off from plans to involve China's Huawei in its 5G network, and this is how he explained it. I quote, "The US has an obligation to ensure the places where we operate, places where US information is, places where we have national security stakes, that they operate within trusted networks, and that is what we will do." Now there you have it. From the US threatening to respond to national security threats anywhere in the world, Pompeo stresses that in order to pursue its global interests unchecked, the US needs and demands, quote, trusted networks. The main threat to US imperialism's predatory ambitions and those of its junior partner Britain is neither Beijing nor Moscow, but an informed and politically mobilised working class. That is why Julian Assange and WikiLeaks must be silenced. That is why whistleblower Chelsea Manning must be made a terrible example of. What does WikiLeaks represent? To answer that question, I want to quote Assange's acceptance speech that he made to the Sydney Peace Foundation gold medal at the Frontline Club in London in 2011. Now, this was made at a time when no one would have dared to question whether Assange deserved a major prize for journalism, let alone declare that he's not a journalist at all. Now, this is what Assange said. "I always keep in mind something that's said by the great poet and novelist Mary Sarton. You have to think like a hero in order to act like a merely decent human being. We are objective, but we are not neutral. We are on the side of justice. Objectivity is not the same as neutrality. We are objective about the facts when it comes to reporting and not distorting facts, but we are not neutral about what kind of world we would like to see. We want to see a more just world. For me and my staff, WikiLeaks will always strive to be an intelligence agency of the people. And we will always, as long as whistleblowers are willing to act as heroes, act like merely decent human beings." Now, these are more than fine words. This is WikiLeaks' mission statement. WikiLeaks has indeed acted as an intelligence agency of the people and at great personal cost to Julian Assange. It's why he's so hated, moreover, by the world rulers. 2 articles published immediately after his arrest and seizure by British police confirm this fact. They show what has led to the US vendetta against him, and it is not the baseless lie that Assange and Chelsea Manning imperiled US troops in Afghanistan and Iraq. Now, on April the 11th, BuzzFeed ran what they said was an exclusive on never-before-seen Department of Defense damage assessment reports made after WikiLeaks released Manning's cache of classified documents. One report on the leaked documents in Afghanistan specifically stated that they would not result in a, quote, significant impact to US military operations. Not result. Another states, and I quote, with high confidence, that disclosure of the Iraq data set will have no direct personal impact on current and former US leadership in Iraq. So not the military aspect at all. The real problem they identified is that leaking details of tens of thousands of previously concealed civilian casualties in Afghanistan and Iraq, and again a quote, could be used by the press or our adversaries to negatively impact support for current operations in the region. Now that is, WikiLeaks might politically galvanise anti-war sentiment all over the world. That is its crime. The next day, April the 12th, US National Public Radio issued its list of how WikiLeaks had threatened America's national security. It noted as one major example the disclosure that the CIA can use state-of-the-art television as a listening device, even if that television is turned off. It cited a former top intelligence operative complaining that this, quote, creates situations where the US intelligence community is going to have to expend resources and going to have to spend both dollars and people to develop new methods. Now that is a crime that must be punished, to cost the state secret agencies so much money. The paid flunkies of the ruling class in Parliament and the media, of course, know all of this and choose to conceal it. Those journalists who rail against Assange and portray him in the vilest terms imaginable, the likes of The Guardian's Suzanne Moore and Hadley Freeman, are themselves absolutely vile. They are part of the official media lie machine, unabashed purveyors of fake news. They would happily sell their souls to the highest bidder if such a bargain could be struck, and the price would be cheap. And when political leaders who claim to be opposed to Assange's extradition to the United States, like Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn, then do nothing, then they too are guilty. The same holds true for those who adopt a pose of impartiality on Sweden's threat to renew demands for Assange to be extradited, and who pretend to believe that the spurious allegations against him are credible and have nothing to do with the US efforts to silence him. Anyone who is not an active partisan in the struggle to secure freedom for Assange and Manning is not only betraying fundamental democratic principles, they are complicit in the ongoing offensive of the imperialist powers against the workers and oppressed peoples of the world. Make no mistake, the price for such betrayals will be coined in blood. The Socialist Equality Party views the defence of Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning as the spearhead of an emerging global struggle against imperialism. Now, we have lived through truly dark times. Decades of uninterrupted wars, not only in Afghanistan and Iraq, but the Balkans, Rwanda, Libya, Syria, Yemen. The list could go on and on. Accompanying this explosion of colonial-style war has been the assault on democratic freedoms carried out in the name of the war on terror, including the mass surveillance exposed by that other heroic whistleblower, Edward Snowden. Now, this eruption of imperialist militarism and break with democratic forms of rule, together with, as Uli has so clearly depicted, the cultivation by the state, by the ruling class of far-right forces, is too fundamental a shift to be explained away as the actions of criminal political elements in the ruling elite, such as Donald Trump. They are the malignant symptoms of a global capitalist system that is in terminal crisis. The conflict between rival powers for control of markets and resources has become so acute in the increasingly globalised world that the regulatory, political and economic mechanisms set up in the aftermath of World War II have broken down forever. As a result, the world in which we live once again resembles that viewed by the generation of the 1930s, one beset by trade war, rearmament, colonial wars and fascist reaction. But this crisis is also unleashing a powerful counterforce on which an entirely different world can be built. The ruling class has spent decades systematically hiking up the brutal exploitation of working people, slashing wages and destroying essential services on which millions of people rely. Not only to more effectively compete for global economic dominance, but to funnel more and more of society's wealth into the coffers of a filthy, super-rich oligarchy. Now, because of the collapse of the Soviet Union, and all the old workers' parties and trade unions, and the political confusion that this generated, the ruling class really thought they could do this forever. Well, they were wrong. The Socialist Equality Party, the International Committee of the Fourth International, and the World Socialist website base our struggle to free Assange and Manning on the international working class. We stand in the tradition of Marx, Engels, Lenin and Trotsky, and we understand that the fight to defend these heroic figures is the spearhead of the struggle against imperialism and for socialism. Now, this perspective now emerges as the only way forward for the whole of humanity. For the past 2 years, we've seen an extraordinary growth in the class struggle in one country after another. Workers suffering unbearable hardship for decades are coming to the bitter conclusion that they must take the fight to those who have ruined their lives and who deny a future to the younger generation, whatever the cost to themselves. And to such people, those coming in to struggle against the existing social order, Assange and Manning's heroic stand on principles is an inspiration. To make this clear, these are some of the comments the World Socialist website has received on Assange. From the UK, quote, Assange is in the forefront of the fight for freedom of speech against corrupt governments, especially by revealing US state security secrets. Quote, Assange is guilty of being a hero, guilty of telling the truth, guilty of exposing US war crimes in Afghanistan and Iraq. These were young school students. From Australia, it's a great shame that Assange is labelled a criminal when he's highlighting the true criminality in our society. He is the voice of the voiceless at the moment, and we should all be fighting for what he's fighting for. Quote, if you can convince workers to band together, people will listen. When someone stands up, it gathers momentum. Workers here should support Assange because we need more of him in the world. And finally, from the United States, as already cited by Niles, the jailing of Assange is an attack on the entire working class. The capitalists and the powers that be are desperate. They don't want workers to know the truth. They recognise that the working class is more powerful than we recognise ourselves, and they are afraid of us.
Absolutely.
Now, this is the voice of the future speaking, and we must give it political expression and leadership. There's been a lot of discussion about history today. That's in the nature of our meetings. We're a historically based party. But I want to make this very clear. Everybody in this room, as Oli has said, is making history. They're on the right side of history because they're involved in the fight back against imperialism. And to conduct that struggle means the defence of Chelsea Manning, it means the defence of Julian Assange, and it means building a new revolutionary leadership in the working class. Thank you very much.